Hey, okay, we're live. For real this time. So, I'm Jozor Johai, and I've had this idea for a while that I wanted to go through basically the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire and map out every social connection between every character that is in the whole story. And I think that I could have just done this on my own without any. I mean, I could have just done this on my own without doing it with you guys, but I figure, I mean, if I'm going to do it anyway, like I might as well just do it on live, chapter by chapter. We'll do read through. I'm going to be noting, I'm basically going to be using Obsidian MD to notate out all of the connections that everyone has, which is what I've got open here. And I'm going to probably also take down like verbatim quotes of like character descriptions because I was kind of thinking that it would be useful to have that like verbatim instead of in the wiki, because I know that the wiki is like this super useful, amazing resource, but it's not like a perfect resource. Sometimes you want quotes. I tend to want quotes, so I'm going to be doing that. And who knows what else we'll do. I think we're probably going to do some analysis as we go through. I'm going to be, we're just going to go through chapter by chapter, and we're going to see what we think. So today we're starting out with the prologue from Game of Thrones, and just to give you guys a sense of what we're working with, I've already got up kind of what it's going to end up looking like, but I do want to do this with you all, so I'm gonna delete this entire thing and we're gonna do it together. Really quick, let me just send out some notifications that I'm live, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to. So you see how this goes, you know. So I've got these. I mean, Obsidian's amazing. I can't say I like Obsidian enough. It's got this whole system where you can. I mean, it's got this whole thing where you can build connections and make data points and build your own interactive wiki, and it's amazing. And I'm going to delete this so that we can do it ourselves. And you know, as we go through, I'm gonna read the chapter, so it's gonna be like a read along, and you know, like as we go along, I mean, we'll see what observations we can make. If you hear crazy stuff in the background, that's my cat going crazy. Like that. Okay, so let's get started. So, yeah, obviously this is a really crazy chapter to begin with. I like that. I like this. The prologue. I mean, if the prologue for Game of Thrones, right? Like, you're not just setting up the book. You're setting up like everything. I mean, and it's funny how like kind of small scale and tight this chapter is, like compared to what the series ends up becoming. like we know the series ends up becoming like this massive, sprawling, like it really turns into this just, well, I guess that's the fun of the series, right? Like this we're going to be going live and we're going to be saying like, okay, we've got 3,078 named characters, and I've found this person on Reddit who says that there's over 7,000 characters if you include unnamed characters. So that's what we're doing. So Game of Thrones prologue. We should start back, Garrett urged as the woods began to grow dark around them. The wildlings are dead. Do the dead frighten you? Sir Waymar Royce asked with just a hint of a smile. I mean, even already, like, what a starting point to go at. Because the other thing is, like, this, it's not just the fact that, it's not just the others, right? Like, there's so much being dealt with in A Song of Ice and Fire about, like, death and undeath. I mean, I would argue that there's kind of an essential question here going on. I mean, it's not just, this chapter is about the others, but, like, this is also going to be about Lady Stoneheart, and it's going to be about Beric, and arguably, I would say Bloodraven. I mean, this is what's going on. Oh, we just entered dark mode, so I guess that's fine. Garrett did not rise to the bait. He was an old man, past 50, and he had seen the lordlings come and go. Dead is dead, he said. We have no business with the dead. That's kind of an interesting line. He's seen the lordlings come and go. Like, obviously, we're referring to Waymar Royce here because Waymar Royce is the lordling, and it's and George R. R. Martin is doing some good work establishing that so quickly. I mean, we're already in we're one sentence in, and we're getting the story of who Waymar Royce is. But it's also, I mean, come and go is just interesting because it just implies a high turnover rate for, like, Garrett. I mean, it's the class issue, right? Like, Garrett has always been a foot soldier ranger, and he's had this high turnover rate of whatever highborn lordlings come into the watch and then lead these things and then move on to the next thing. I mean, we know that Alistair later on has no business being the master at arms, so I think this is the beginning of that. Oh, and then I'm getting so caught up in this. We're not doing our, all right, so forget that. This is the beginning. We have two characters already. So we have Waymar Royce. And so we have this node comes up. And I'm going to do a couple of things. I've got this class called Chapters, and I'm going to say he's in the Game of Thrones prologue. I've got this, I'm not sure if I'm going to use the POV class. I think I'm going to say house is going to be something we track, so it's going to be a House Royce. I think we'll track, we're going to track his affiliation, so we can do the Night's Watch here. We can always get back to that later if you want. I was thinking about having a property where it's like true or false, whether or not they're POV, but I don't know if we need that yet. I guess I can do that. Oh, except that's not true. He's not the POV. Getting caught up here. And so we know that, I guess in the story yet, we don't technically know that they're in the Night's Watch, do we? I know that, so I'm putting it already. But we know that he knows Garrod. And we don't have a last name for Garrod, so I'm going to call him Garrod the Night's Watchman, because that's all I have going on here. And since we've met Garrod, I'll say, oh, and then I'll say, we'll know what chapter we're in now, and I'll add this bit for description, because I said I was going to do that. We don't have anything with this yet, but we'll say Lordling. And we've got Garrod the Night's Watchman. So we're going to say this guy is in the Game of Thrones prologue. He's with a nice watch. We're not going to give him a house because he doesn't have a house. What did I say for Waymar? I just said prologue. That should be a Game of Thrones prologue. We'll say that he knows Waymar, and we'll have the description here. We'll say past 50. So here's our little two-person. Oh, this should be description. I'll say past 50. And what else does that say? We have, he was an old man past 50. Seen the Lord is come and go. Okay, so back to the reading. I'll interject less with this, with my own thoughts here, because we're going to be wanting to focus on the on the mapping. So, are they dead? Royce asked softly. What proof have we? Will saw them, Garrod said. If he says they are dead, that's proof enough for me. Will had known they would drag him into the quarrel sooner or later. He wished it had been later rather than sooner. My mother told me that dead men sing no songs, he put in. This is a funny, I just like empathize with Will here. There's sort of a funny like moment, I think, for you to have. I mean, he doesn't want to get involved, and so he kind of like they drag him into the conversation, and he says this sort of non-thing. He doesn't really add anything to the debate of like, it's a debate of his own knowledge, but he won't even defend himself here. He just wants to come in and say this, like, quote his mother here. But we're gonna add Will into these people, and we'll call Will the Night's Watchman as well, because we don't have anything else for him. Will the Night's Watchman. We're gonna run through our stuff really quick. Game of Thrones prologue. Add property no house, so we'll do affiliation Night's Watch, and we'll do POV. This guy is a POV. I didn't do that for Garrod, did I? And I don't think we have anything. Now there's a bit of a, I haven't exactly figured out how I want to deal with this yet, because if you wanted a really expansive thing, if you really wanted to capture the breadth of this, I would say that we would also include Will's mother, even though she doesn't get named, and she basically doesn't exist, but she is referenced. So do we include her in this map or not? I think for now, I'm honestly going to avoid this problem. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference the fact that we've got, because this is the other thing that I have yet to figure out exactly how I want to deal with. Because there's this two tiers of interaction, right? There's people who are like who are present with each other. This is Irene. Everyone say hi, Irene. So there's there's two tiers of separation here, right? Like, should we be marking people that we know people actually know? Which I guess his mother is included in that. But there's also, like, I mean, people get referenced. You get, like, a character will talk about another character, but, like, maybe they've not actually met. I think that's the kind of thing that I'm going to have to include in the notes here. I've been looking at plugins for Obsidian that would let me, like, indicate that kind of thing on the actual map we have, where, like, there are plugins that will label these things, but I'm not satisfied with how they work. So we'll keep going with that. Maybe that'll develop as an idea. Maybe it won't. We'll see. I guess it's sort of cheating to say this, but we do know that these people know each other from the Night's Watch. Oh, and I guess if I really wanted to, I could make this a link too, actually. Yeah, we'll do that. But we won't fill anything in there yet. Oh, and then so this is my thing: is do we include? Yeah, so we'll say that he references his mother, and then someday, if we want, I'll go back. We can go back and include her as her own node, even though we know nothing about her. My wet nurse said the same thing, Will, Royce replied. Never believe anything you hear at a woman's TED. There are things to be learned even from the dead. His voice echoed too loud in the twilight forest. I mean, there's so much in this, too. I mean, we're establishing the wet nurse idea, which, like, we're establishing the wet nurse idea, which becomes relevant, like, with the whole Jon Snow debacle. I mean, how does Jon Snow fare with having the wet nurse? How to, is Willa actually his mother with the wet nurse? I mean, this like comes in later. This is also like a class issue that we get laid out like incredibly early. We're only paragraphs in, and we're talking about like the fact that Waymar Royce is like this noble, and so he gets a wet nurse, whereas everyone else doesn't have that kind of experience. And then the sentence itself is just interesting. I mean, never believe anything you hear at a woman's TED. I mean, this is absolutely not true, because we go on and find out that old Nan is just old Nan, who began as a wet nurse, is just the absolute paramount authority of correct information. So he's wrong about that. But on the other side, I mean, we're only a page into this, and we've got there are things to be learned even from the dead. And Bran, I mean, and I argue that Bloodraven is not alive exactly. I mean, maybe he's alive in a sense. I don't really think that whatever Bloodraven is counts as alive. Obviously, we're like books and books away. But whatever Bloodraven's not alive, not dead state is, like, there are things to be learned from that. I mean, even Beric and Stoneheart, I mean, people theorize that Melisandre is also kind of in this stasis. But I guess on the other hand, you could say maybe Waymar is just wrong here. I mean, maybe we say he's wrong about doubting everything you hear at a woman's TED. That's wrong. And then we say that he's wrong about there are things to be learned from the dead, because what is the who are our dead things so far? I mean, Stoneheart is not a great role model. Beric wasn't giving new information. Beric was kind of stuck in his own past. And then you have things like the Undying. I mean, do we say that Dany learned a lot from the Undying, or do we say that Dany didn't really learn from the Undying? The Undying were kind of just taunting Dany. I mean, I don't know how we take that necessarily. And then his voice echoed too loud in the Twilight Forest. I mean, this to me is just the beginning of it's good. It's good, like atmospheric work. I mean, you're aware, even from this. I mean, it's a great sentence because we're not saying anything. George hasn't said anything about anyone else here. We only have the three people here. But just establishing that his voice is echoing and is too loud. I mean, you have this eerie sensation of maybe there is something. I mean, you're just aware of the fact that there could be something out there. So back to this. We have a long ride before us, Garrett pointed out. 8 days, maybe 9, and night is falling. Sir Waymar glanced at the sky with disinterest. It does that every day about this time. Are you unmanned by the dark, Garrett? This is another, I don't want to read overly into every single thing, but, on the subject of Waymar just being generally wrong, I mean, it's not just that he's kind of, it's not just that he's in denial about whether or not the dark and the night is important for the story, that is going to be so much about the night is dark and full of terrors and the long night is coming and all these things, but we also have so many other better instances later on of people looking to the sky and gaining information, not just about John and Ygritte look at the constellations. There's so many. We as the readers can gain so much information from the moon phase that things are in. This is just and you have Garrett later on here is talking about all of this spatial awareness that you get as a ranger, kind of experience that you get. This is just obviously Sir Waymar Royce is just. This is just such a character moment for he has no sense of the experience that you need. He has no sense of any of that stuff. But are you unmanned by the dark, Garrett? I also love this phrase, unmanned. Because I feel like you could, if you wanted to overanalyze everything, which I don't know why I'm doing that necessarily, but unmanned by the dark. Because this sort of unmanned kind of it has this flavor of undead, we're talking about, are you afraid of the dead? Are you afraid of the dark? Are you unmanned? Is this a reference to the whites resurrected? Are those sort of unmen in a sense? I think that's a really interesting way to use that phrase right away. I think unmanned is actually, I think it's a very interesting choice of words. To continue. Sir Waymar Royce glanced at the sky with disinterest. Oh no, that's what we saw. Will could see the tightness around Garrett's mouth, the barely suppressed anger in his eyes under the thick black hood of his cloak. Garrett had spent 40 years in the Night's Watch, man and boy, and he was not accustomed to being made light of. Yet it was more than that. Under the wounded pride, Will could sense something else in the older man. You could taste it. A nervous tension that came perilous close to fear. So I'll take my cue and we'll add that Garrett is wearing a thick black cloak. So we'll say thick black hood. So if you're doing art, you want to know what they're wearing. That's the key. We'll add that he spent 40 years in the Night's Watch. It's not really a description, but this is sort of something that you could get from the wiki. Although I guess, what, have we mentioned the Night's Watch yet? This is the introduction of the concept of the Night's Watch. So I was being a loyalist to my system here. This is where I would introduce the White Night's Watch, because this is the first mention of it. Will shared his unease. He had been 4 years on the wall. Oh, and so here's our first mention of the wall to go along with it. The first time he had been sent beyond, all the stories had come rushing back, and his bowels had turned to water. He had laughed about it afterward. He was a veteran of 100 rangings by now, and the endless dark wilderness that the Southron called the Haunted Forest had no more terrors for him. So this is where we've established this, but this is where we're going to say that we've got this for sure. I don't know if I'm going to include locations in this. I feel like locations... Oh man, I mean, should I include locations? Kind of an interesting idea. I could include them as a tag. Is that crazy if I start doing this? I don't think so. I think we'll do this. I'm going to develop this system as we go along. I can't decide if I'm going to do locations as a property, or I think a tag makes sense. And then do we include, and that's the other thing, is like, do we then include everywhere they've been that we know of? Or just the places that we see them in? I mean, should we say they reference the wall? Yeah, I mean, we'll do that. We'll do that. "4 years on the wall, first time we sent beyond Southern Forest until tonight. Something was different tonight." Let's bring this back. Something was different tonight. There was an edge to this darkness that made his hackles rise. 9 days they'd been riding, north and northwest and then north again, farther and farther from the wall, and they hard on the track of a band of wilding raiders. Each day had been worse than the day that had come before it. Today was the worst of all. A cold wind was blowing out of the north, and it made the trees rustle like living things. All day, Will had felt as though something were watching him, something cold and implacable that loved him not. Garrett had felt it too. Will wanted nothing so much as to ride hell-bent for the safety of the wall, but that was not a feeling to share with your commander. I wonder about whether or not there's causation being directly implied here. A cold wind was blowing out of the north, and it made the trees rustle like living things. I mean, I've talked elsewhere about like this notion of like, are the werewoods as a living thing? Is like it important to think about the werewoods as living things? I mean, there's so many references elsewhere about the trees as living things, be it soldier pines and sentinel trees. And there's so many times where like the trees are described as living. I think it's interesting that here in the first chapter, we're being told that the thing that's making the trees rustle like living things is the cold wind. You know, I wonder if there's a connection there. Especially not a commander like this one. To continue. Sir Waymar Royce was the youngest son of an ancient house with too many heirs. You know, I guess this is where... Hold on. Well, let's see here. Sir Waymar Royce was the youngest son of an ancient house with too many heirs. He was a handsome youth of 18, gray-eyed and graceful and slender as a knife. Mounted on his huge black destrier, the knight towered above Will and Garrod on their smaller garrons. He wore black leather boots, black woolen pants, black moleskin gloves, and a fine supple coat of gleaming black ringmail over layers of black wool and boiled leather. Sir Waymar had been a sworn brother of the Night's Watch for less than half a year, but no one could say he had not prepared for his vocation, at least insofar as his wardrobe was concerned. So this is a great chapter for our descriptions of Will, and also our first mention of what House Royce really is. So let's go here. So we've got how can I make this easy for me to read? Okay. Wait, can I just copy and paste this? Is that cheating? No, they don't let you do that, do they? Handsome youth of 18, gray-eyed. That's key. Some people think that's a really key piece of information. I mean, there's a whole theory about whether Waymar was attacked because he looked like a Stark. I don't know if I buy that myself. I mean, I think the thing is, like, it's one of those things where not a huge black gesture. This is funny. This doesn't matter as much here. But this is this issue about riding the right horse. I mean, this like comes back again in A Dance with Dragons, when Stannis' southern army is mounted on the wrong horses. Waymar Royce is, I guess, yeah, he's a southern lord. The Vale. Black woolen pants. Black moleskin gloves. And a fine supple coat. Over layers of wool and boiled leather. So there's this theory that some people have, that the others go on to attack Waymar Royce because he looks like a Stark. And you don't know that from this chapter, but it becomes relevant later because you learn that the Starks look a certain way, and then you go back and you think, well, wait a second, Waymar is gray-eyed and slender in the same way that Jon is gray-eyed and slender. But I kind of feel like this is one of those instances of the fandom taking like a parallel like symbol or parallel image and thinking it means a literal thing. Like I tend to think the fandom does this a lot, where like you have a thematic parallel, and people think that people identify the thematic parallel and they think that they found a literal answer to something. And I think the answer here is that Waymar Royce is thematically supposed to stand in for the Starks, for the reader, not for the others. For the reader, I think Waymar is supposed to be a stand-in for the Starks. And I think this is establishing in this chapter the relationship between the Starks and the others, this kind of conflict. I don't think that it necessarily literally means that the others were looking for a Stark and they found Waymar. But you never know. I mean, it could go either way. I mean, this is the thing. You could go either way. I mean, I tend not to go for the literal, and I tend to instead think that some of these parallels are happening on sort of a textual level instead. And then we can't forget, so I mean, moving on though, we can't forget key important thing. His cloak was his crowning glory. Sable, thick and black and soft as sin. And soft as sin, I mean, what a great line to show like the decadence of this being like almost sinful in a way. I mean, this like it's a judgment about Waymar Royce. And we're just gonna say it explicitly. It's soft as sin. And then we have Garrett laughing about it. Bet he killed them all himself, he did. Garrett told the barracks over wine. Twisted their little heads off, our mighty warrior. They had all shared the laugh. It was hard to take orders from a man you laughed at in your cups, Will reflected as he sat shivering atop his garron. Garrett must have felt the same. Mormont said as we should track 'em, and we did, Garrett said. They're dead. They shan't trouble us no more. There's hard riding before us. I don't like this weather. If it snows, we could be a fortnight getting back, and snow's the best we could hope for. Ever seen an ice storm, my lord? So here is our first reference of Mormont. But I don't know. Oh, and we should say, first, Mormont, I don't know if I want to throw Jor Mormont in here yet. I feel like we get a full name for Jor Mormont later. But if not, I'll go back and I'll add him in. We'll say the reference is House Royce. We forgot to add this in before. And we did get a description of House Royce in a way. So we'll say House Royce. I haven't thought about what the properties here are going to be. Affiliation. Vale, does that count? We'll see. Add property. House Royce. Yeah, sure. That's kind of cheating. I should have said House Royce. Let's see, there we go. This should be House Royce. Yeah, look at that. Okay. House Royce. Do I give it anything else? Do we count this as, I mean, I guess we would count this. So we'll say that in the Game of Thrones prologue, yeah, I mean, honestly, we'll say this. We'll say that there was a member of House Royce in the Haunted Forest. Yeah, I mean, that's great. And we'll also say description. We'll take what we can get from here. We'll say ancient house. With too many heirs. I forgot to add this in part in earlier, but we're going to throw this in. Ancient house with too many heirs. So we got Waymar Royce. We have House Royce mentioned. Put House Royce in the houses category here. And we'll keep going with the reading again. The lordling seemed not to hear him. He studied the deepening twilight in that half-bored, half-distracted way he had. Will had ridden with the knight long enough to understand that it was best not to interrupt him when he looked like that. Tell me again what you saw, Will. All the details. Leave nothing out. You know, I guess I should add that he is a knight, shouldn't I? Maybe I should even add that. I mean, I could add that as a category of person. I could make it like, are they knights or lords? Oh, is that... Oh, it's so tempting to just do this for everything. Let's do this. Oh, no, I don't want this. We don't want this kind of thing. Yeah, new thing, class. I hope I don't mess this up with this. Yeah, we'll do this. And then we'll do, Garrod, we'll just say he's small folk. Yeah, because then later we can sort this out by what people are. That'll be interesting. We'll still say that he's a knight. And then, so now we get Will. So he's prompted Will to say the descriptions. Will had been a hunter before he joined the Night's Watch. Will, a poacher in truth. Malister freeriders had caught him red-handed in the Malister's own woods, skinning one of the Malister's own bugs, and it had been a choice of putting on the black or losing a hand. No one could move through the woods as silent as Will, and it had not taken the Black brothers long to discover his talent. There's another fun, I like this. We're gonna say that this references House. We're gonna say that Will references House Malister. House Malister mentioned. And if we were going to go crazy, we could even start adding in the properties for House Malister here now, right? House Malister, we'll say that they, I don't know if we'll say that they get mentioned in the Game of Thrones prologue necessarily. But we have enough information to say that they have enough lands for their own woods. That's even interesting in itself. Of course, meaning-wise, this is another one of these class things to go on. I guess it's funny that we don't, everyone, this is something I think about. I'm starting 100 ideas. All of the point of view characters in A Song of Ice and Fire are noble. Right? Until you get to, Melisandre, I guess, is not. And, Arya Hotah isn't. That's not till later on. You go 3 books with everyone being noble. And you get, kind of the insight into the perspective of the small folk with Davos, but Davos' preoccupation is the fact that he's noble now. So there are very few times where we actually get to see the class issue in Song of Ice and Fire from the perspective of the small folk. And it's only the prologues for a long time. Will... so you have Will, later you have Chet in the Night's Watch, you have Pate in the Maesters for Feast. And then other than that, you get these long arcs to give you insight into the life of the small folk. Arya has this adventure for 2 books where she's, play acting a small folk character. And I think that, is meant to give you that perspective. I think Brienne in Feast kind of lives a little bit like a small folk, except not really, because she always has money. And it's something I think about when I think about writing my own stories, is the fact that I really want to write stories about people who aren't the nobility, right? But it's funny in a book like this because if you were going to accurately write, if George R. R. Martin was going to write a story accurately where the people aren't noble, where you're going to get a character who appears in every book who's just one of the small folk, The trouble there is that that character will have no agency. That character would have no money to do things with. It would have no um, high stakes in the plot that matters to the rest of the story. I mean, the stakes are very real. I mean, the stakes of people in the Riverlands are their lives during the War of the Five Kings, but there's nothing that they can do about it. So what do you do with this? What do you do with the character? You know, like there's the class issue is so concrete that you can't even write a compelling. I mean, I guess you could. Obviously, you could. I would like to. I believe it can be done, but I understand why George doesn't, because it's much easier, even if you want to show the life of the small folk. It's much easier to put Arya there so that Arya still cares about the Tullys and the Starks versus the Lannisters and the stuff, and doesn't just see the entire thing as like, who cares what's going on here? Like, everyone's getting killed. You know, because you can get that message. But reading a character who thinks that, it would be, I think, well, I think it would be depressing to begin with, but it also just, it would be sort of static. But you get to do it for the prologue, so you get to have this insight. I mean, we learn about the Malisters later. I mean, it's funny thinking about this, because the Malisters later on are major characters. I mean, what was his name? Justin Mallister? I always forget. I mix him up with Justin Massey, so it's Jason Mallister. So Jason Mallister, he becomes a player a little bit. Not a player, actually, but he becomes a character. And you never get this reference of the fact that he would have any idea or care in the least that someone's been poaching on his land. I mean, it's never brought up. It's a non-issue to them. It's completely irrelevant compared to the things that they're dealing with the kingship and the Game of Thrones that are happening. But you always have in the back of your mind, I mean, this reminder that for all of these nobles that are doing their dealing and their stuff, they've got this whole world of people operating underneath them that are just there to keep the small folk from hunting their bucks in their land. I mean, it's really an interesting thing to include in here. But to continue here, Will's talented, and he's going to relay his advice here. So, the camp is 2 miles farther on. Over that ridge, hard behind a stream, Will said. I got as close as I dared. There's 8 of them, men and women both. No children I could see. They put up a lean-to against the rock. The snow's pretty well covered it for now. But I could still make it out. No fire burning, but the fire pit was still plain as day. No one moving. I watched a long time. No living man ever lay so still. Did you see any blood? Well, no, Will admitted. Did you see any weapons? Some swords, a few bows. One man had an axe, heavy-looking, double-bladed, a cruel piece of iron. It was on the ground beside him, right by his hand. Did you make note of the position of the bodies? Will shrugged. A couple are sitting up against the rock. Most are on the ground, fallen-like. Or sleeping, Roy suggested. Fallen, Will insisted. There's one woman up in Ironwood, half hidden in the branches, afar eyes. He smiled thinly. I took care she never saw me. When I got closer, I saw she wasn't moving neither. Despite himself, he shivered. You have a chill? Royce asked. Some, Will muttered. The wind, Millard. So, there's a really interesting implication here that I don't think gets expanded on too much explicitly. Because, Waymar goes on, and maybe I'll get into this later, but Waymar goes on to point out, okay, you know what, I will actually talk about this later. I will say, to begin with, I don't know if it matters, but it is interesting that Waymar specifically asks Will to make note of the position of the bodies. A couple are sitting up against a rock, most of them on the ground, fallen like. because it does make you wonder, does that matter? Because I don't think it really matters for the story. I mean, it's important for the story because it's important for the story in the sense that we later find the wildlings and they're all gone. So the fact that you've been reminded exactly like where they were and how many they were and the fact that they were like sitting there, all that is like relevant information. But it does make you think, it does make you wonder whether or not we should be specifically noting the way that they were. Although, I mean, it could be nothing. It could just be to remind you. The more interesting thing is, we'll get to in a second. Again, we have this thing with the cold. Does the cold animate? Is the cold scared? Are you afraid of the dead? You have a chill. The wind, my lord. I mean, all that stuff is relevant, I think. The young knight turned back to his grizzled man-at-arms. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. So, grizzled man-at-arms. So we'll say that Garrod is grizzled. And I think we also, I don't think I realized that he's a man-at-arms. So that's interesting. So he turns back to his grizzled man-at-arms. Frost-fallen leaves whispered past them, and Rice's Destre moved restlessly. This is another, I mean, this is so great. So again, we have, in a second, we have frost-fallen leaves whispered past them. I mean, it is the exact same idea of the cold makes the trees feel alive. Frost-fallen, the cold, makes the leaves fall, and the leaves whisper. Again, the same idea. The cold makes the trees feel alive. I wonder about that. What do you think might have killed these men, Garrod? Sir Waymar asked casually. He adjusted the drape of his long sable cloak. I think it's interesting to note he adjusted the drape. I mean, I think this is the first clue that we get about Waymar caring about his appearances in this instance. Obviously, we know Waymar cares about his appearance. There's this long thing about how ostentatiously he decided to dress even in all black. But I think this is a moment of him being self-conscious here. I think this is the beginning of it. I mean, he's adjusting the way he looks because he wants to appear a certain way. And then here we have Garrod's monologue. It was the cold, Garrod said with iron certainty. I saw men freeze last winter, and the one before when I was half a boy. Everyone talks about snows 40 foot deep and how the ice wind comes howling out of the north, but the real enemy is the cold. It steals up on you quieter than will, and at first you shiver and your teeth chatter and you stamp your feet and dream of mulled wine and nice hot fires. It burns, it does. Nothing burns like the cold, but only for a while. Then it gets inside you and starts to fill you up, and after a while you don't have the strength to fight it. It's easier to just sit down or go to sleep. They say you don't feel any pain towards the end. First you get weak and drowsy, and everything starts to fade, and then it's like sinking into a sea of warm milk. Peaceful like. So, okay, well, and then we get such eloquence, Garrod, Sir Waymar observed. I never suspected you had it in you. This line would go crazy in a animated adaptation. I mean, if they ever adapted these books, which I don't know if they ever will, but if they ever did, they really should include that line because it would just land so well. But I also love that, like, it's one thing to have, like, okay, so George R.R. Martin is going to come in and say, like, we're going to have this, like, really poetic monologue that Garrod's going to do. But it's a totally other thing to then have that acknowledged in the story. Because then it really, like, drives home the fact that, like, Garrod is this 50-year-old grizzled man-at-arms. And in him, canonically, he has this poetic sense to him. He has this like actual way of thinking that is eloquent. I mean, he's just this small folk guy, but he's gonna say stuff. But so this is the one where I feel like, so I was saying earlier that that I think that there's something interesting about the way these wildling die, and I think this is it, because because obviously by the time the chapter ends, it's interesting that it's the wildlings die of cold, and then they're gone mysteriously, and then the others are there mysteriously. I mean, all of it is interesting. But I think that there really is something to the fact, to Garrett's thing about it being the cold. Because we get this, I mean, it's mysterious how they died, and Waymar points out that it's not really the cold. But then if that is the case, then how did they die? And I think Garrett's monologue is the answer to that. I mean, Garrett says the real enemy is the cold. And I think that this happens, I think this is the answer. I mean, because you get later on in A Dance with Dragons, I mean, you have this whole, I mean, this is I think the others, my headcanon here, my theory here, is that the others are, in a way, incorporeal. And I think that there genuinely is a literal truth. And I was just saying that you can't take literal things from symbolic meanings, but I think that there might be something to the idea that they are in some way essentially the cold. I mean, the real enemy is the cold, but I wonder how much of this is a metaphoric connection, that the real enemy is the cold, and the cold here is standing in for the others, which you have yet to meet, and how much of that is like genuinely true, because how did the others kill the wildlings? I mean, we know the wildlings died. It seemed like they died from cold. We spent this chapter establishing that we don't trust Waymar, and we do trust Garrett, and Garrett has all the experience, and Waymar is just this young idiot. And Garrett says it's the cold. I mean, I think this is like an old Nan situation, where old Nan is actually right about a lot of things. And this is what Garrett is going to be right about this. And so you get this thing in A Dance with Dragons later on, where Tormund's son, Toreg, dies, and he dies of the cold, and then he gets resurrected as a wight, and Tormund has to kill him again as a wight. And I've always thought that was a really interesting detail, because it implies that the others, one, it implies the others can resurrect people remotely, and two, it implies that the others have some kind of way to capitalize on people dying from the cold and turning them into wights after that fact. The others don't have to directly kill people to make them wights. The others can kill people with cold and make them wights then. And so we get this scene in the very beginning where these people do seem to have died from the cold and then disappear. I mean, I kind of think it's proof of that. And the other interesting thing is if you take Garrett as being right here in a sort of essential sense. Maybe he's not literally describing what's literally happening, because we know there's a supernatural element to this. But if we trust Garrett in a certain way, there's something interesting about his actual description here, right? Obviously, Song of Ice and Fire, we're really noting people who are talking about fire and ice at once. It burns, nothing burns like the cold. I mean, that's huge. But I think that's more, it's obviously, it's the similarity of ice and fire here. It's kind of how they're sort of two sides of the same thing, the same pain, the same mortal enemy in a way. But I also think it's interesting that then after that, after it burns like the cold, then it gets inside you and starts to fill you up. And after a while, you don't have the strength to fight it. I mean, I wonder if right there we're getting a description of how the wights work. Because the thing is, with the fire wights, I'll have to make a note of this to come back to later, but With the fire wights, you get this idea that the fire wights are um, are in a way like filled with the fire. I mean, Melisandre, we don't know for sure if Melisandre is a fire wight or anything like that. Um, but I would say Melisandre, whatever her deal is, like talks about how literally she feels like the fire fills her up and sustains her. And then here you have the exact same thing. I mean, it's the same idea. The cold gets inside you and fills you up. And I think this is what the others are doing. Oh, and hi. Thanks for chatting and saying hi. I'm glad we've got some live viewership. That's great. So I think that Garrett has some sort of there's sort of a spiritual truth here to what Garrett's saying, which I think is just how this works. Of course, I mean, guess what am I going to say? Well, no. Okay, so then think about what I was just saying and apply it to this. I've had the cold in me too, lordling. Garrett pulled back his hood, giving Sir Waymar a good long look at the stumps where his ears had been. 2 ears, 3 toes, and the little finger off my left hand. I got off light. We found my brother frozen at his watch with a smile on his face. So, number 1, we'll open up Obsidian again and we'll log these new details we've got. So, we know he's missing He's missing 2 ears, 3 toes, and the little finger off his left hand. And we can also say that his ears are stumps. So we'll just add that into a little description here. And I wonder here about the connection between the cold being inside you and death, because I think that still holds. I think you have, I've had the cold in me, and wherever the cold has been in him, he's dead. And then that is the wights. I mean, the wights are filled with the cold, like the fire wights are filled with fire. And then with that in them, they're dead. I think that there's, I mean, obviously that's just literally true. That's like how freezing to death works, right? But I think it also is, I think that might be a hint to the magic that's going on here. Okay, so going back to this, and this is just, God, this is just such a rude thing to say. Sir Waymar shrugged. You ought to dress more warmly, Garrett. I mean, why say something like that? That's crazy. You ought to dress more warmly, Garrett? I mean, okay, so like on one level, right, like this is the class issue again. This is the class issue of the fact that Waymar, even on the Night's Watch, where we later learn everything's supposed to be equal and there's egalitarian, whatever. But even on the Night's Watch, it matters that Waymar came with a sable cloak and Garrett didn't. And Garrett, because all he has is what the Night's Watch has to offer him, is freezing his toes off, literally. But it's also just like, it's just so actually mean and vindictive to flaunt that in Garrett's face in this moment. I mean, it's crazy. So Garrett glared at the lordling, the scars around his ear holes flushed red with anger where Maester Aemon had cut the ears away. We'll see how warm you can dress when the winter comes. He pulled up his hood and hunched over his garron, silent and sullen. So, so I don't know if this is like meant to be a case where Waymar is like intentionally being cruel to like establish dominance in a way, or what's exactly happening, but it is just so extra. And, new person mentioned, we have his frostbitten ears cut off by Maester Aemon. Aemon, not Maester Aemon. Maester Aemon. And that's going to be cool because this is the first reference of Maester Aemon. And we'll also add, I guess we'll add that he has scars around his ear holes. And of course he's going to be silent and sullen. I mean, that's just like, I mean, and so if it is if it is Waymar asserting dominance on purpose by being mean, because that's how dominance is asserted in feudalism, as we later learn. I mean, we later go on, and the entire story is just full of this. It's this entire world of people just being cruel to each other to assert their own dominance. So if this holds with that, then this is just a microcosm of that. You have Waymar is faced with a moment here where his authority is being challenged by the small folk. I mean, you have a microcosm here. It's, oh my god, this scene is such a perfect microcosm of the class in A Song of Ice and Fire from here on out. You have Waymar Royce is alone. He's one highborn lordling, and then there are twice as many small folk with him, and yet he's still establishing the dominance that he has in the scenario by being unnecessarily cruel. Hi. Okay, so I might think that's really interesting. I'll have to make a note of that I'll have to make a note of this too. And you have this moment where Waymar Royce is having his authority challenged as stand-in for Highborn Lord, and the response is cruelty. I mean, and you see this repeated for the rest of the story. All right, rather than just cruelty, you have him trying to use logic here to outsmart the scenario. So Will, the other lower class small folk person, comes in to defend Garrett. So if Garrett said it was the cold, Will began. Have you drawn any watches this past week, Will? Yes, my lord. There never was a week where he did not draw a dozen bloody watches. What was the man driving at? And how did you find the wall? Weeping, Will said, frowning. He saw it clear enough, now that the lordling had pointed it out. They couldn't have froze. Not the wall was weeping. It wasn't cold enough. So, I mean, I think that there's so much... I mean, the fact that the wall weeps... We don't know enough about that to say anything about that here, but it really is just... I mean, there's something there. There's something poetic about that. There's something meaningful, I think, about that. Royce nodded. Bright lad. We've had a few light frosts this past week, and a quick flurry of snow now and then, but surely no cold fierce enough to kill ain't-grown men. Men clad in fur and leather, let me remind you, with shelter near at hand and the means of making fire. The knight's smile was cocksure. Will, lead us there. I would see these dead men for myself. And there was nothing to be done for it. The order had been given, and honor bound them to obey. So it's so funny here how back to back you have two... back to back you have the two instances of the ways that authority are laid out. Waymar has to Garrett, who challenges his authority with experience. There is this response with cruelty to push these people down. And then you have the other approach, the good cop, right, who Royce turns to Will and says, well, here's like let me lift you up to the educated, bright way. You're such a bright lad. I've led you to the knowledge that I believe in, and now you can lead me because I order you to. I mean, it's such a, there's so much getting packed in here that for what's going on. Will went in front, his shaggy little Garen picking the way carefully through the undergrowth. A light snow had fallen the night before, and there were stones and roots and hidden sinks lying just under the crust, waiting for the careless and the unwary. Sir Waymar Royce came next, his great black destrier snorting impatiently. The warhorse was the wrong mount for ranging, but try and tell that to the lordling. Garrett brought up the rear. The old man-at-arms muttered to himself as he rode. I think that we don't need to talk about this at length, but I think George does a really cool job of using the setting to kind of speak to the meaning of what's going on here. So you have the way that so this thing with the snow had fallen the night before. I mean, even just to begin with, that the snow had fallen the night before. I mean, it's that alone is the setup, I think, for the way that the others are going to matter later. But then also the fact that then you have this thing where the snow then hides these pitfalls and stones and roots and hidden sinks. I mean, I think that's also a part of the setting, kind of representing this. I mean, you have this kind of twofold thing about how these two back-to-back ways in which the North is hostile. And immediately after this thing about how the North is hostile, you have twilight deepened. The cloudless sky turned a deep purple, the color of an old bruise, then faded to black. The stars began to come out. A half moon rose. Will was grateful for the light. I didn't go out to, so here's something. I mean, we reference the fact that purple is the color of twilight. I mean, is there anything there to the Valyrians' purple eyes? And this being, if we believe that there is a long night coming, are we in the twilight of the story right now? And are the Valyrians' purple eyes heralding that in some way? I think there's possible for that. The other thing, I didn't intend... I don't know if I should do this. I didn't intend to do this, but I do think that tracking the timeline would also be interesting in this. But someone else has already done that. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can make a better pace than this, surely, Royce said when the moon was full risen. Not with this horse, Will said. Fear had made him insolent. Perhaps my lord would care to take the lead? Sir Waymar Royce did not deign to reply. Somewhere off in the wood, a wolf howled. And that too, is that... I mean, it's just notable that we already have wolves in the prologue. That the wolves are out in the wood. In this haunted forest. I mean, the wolves are... I mean, if we think of the Starks as... And I know the Starks are dire wolves, but if we think of the Starks as wolves, and the fact that the wolves here are at home in the north, or at home in the haunted forest, I mean, is there anything to the Starks being kind of one with the north, one with specifically beyond the wall? I mean, people... There are theories about that, but, we're not going to... Will pulled his Garen over beneath an ancient gnarled ironwood and dismounted. Why are you stopping? Sir Waymar asked. Best to go the rest of the way on foot, my lord. It's just over that ridge. Royce paused a moment, staring off into the distance, his face reflective. A cold wind whispered through the trees. His great sable cloak stirred behind like something half alive. This is such a cool bit. That we have this line about how there's something half alive right behind him. Right as the cold wind whispered. Again, the same exact thing. Cold whispered through the trees. You have the cold... The trees talking, the cold wind causing it. And people speculate about the... There's a lot of speculation about the connection between the werewoods and the others. And I think this is another one of those things. Like, does the cold wind being the impetus for the way the trees talk repeatedly now matter for anything? I think there's something to it. And then immediately after that, the cold wind whispering through the trees, then right behind Waymar Royce is something half alive. And then immediately after that, there's something wrong here, Garrett muttered. The young knight gave him a disdainful smile. Is there? Can't you feel it? Garrett asked. Listen to the darkness. Will could feel it. Will could feel it. 4 years in the night's watch, and he had never been so afraid. What was it? Wind, trees rustling, a wolf. What sound is it that unmans you so, Garrett? And then this is so great. So as I was just talking about the wind and the trees and then being the others and the werewoods, I mean, this is the answer again. What was it? Wind, trees rustling, a wolf. What unmans you, Garrett? I mean, there's that word again. We don't. I mean, I wonder, does unmans even come up? Where does unmans appear elsewhere? I mean, it's literally just here that we get. Oh no, it appears elsewhere. Unmans we get elsewhere. It gets used a little elsewhere. I wonder if there's something to that phrase. The young knight gave him a disdainful smile. Is there? Can you feel it? Listen to the darkness also. The night is dark, full of terrors. Listen to the darkness. I mean, also if we're listening to the darkness and the darkness is what's making the sound, we have this connection here. I mean, we have to retroactively connect these things, right? But we have the others being connected to the darkness, being connected to the wind and the wolves and the trees bustling. And then also, if we think, I know, okay, so Alt-Shift-X has this theory about the Starks being connected to the others, literally. I mean, I can see that being the case, but I'm more, I've been skeptical of that idea. But I wonder if this is the answer to that, though. I mean, here, does this connect those ideas? Wind, trees rustling, a wolf. I mean, are these like this? Is this the trifecta of northern powers here? The others, the cold wind, the old gods and the werewoods with the trees rustling, and the wolves with the Starks. Okay, so we'll move on. When Garrett did not answer, Royce slid gracefully from his saddle. He tied the destrier securely to a low-hanging limb, well away from the other horses, and drew his longsword from its sheath. Jewels glittered in its hilt, and the moonlight ran down the shining steel. It was a splendid weapon, castle forged and new made from the look of it. Will doubted it had ever been swung in anger. The trees press close here, Will warned. That sword will tangle you up, my lord. Better a knife. If I need instruction, I will ask for it, the young lord said. Garrett, stay here. Guard the horses. Okay, so I'll add here that Waymar Royce has a longsword with jewels in its hilt. That's castle forged and new made. Because, accessories are important. Garrett dismounted. We need to fire. I'll see to it. How big a fool are you, old man? There are enemies in this wood. A fire is the last thing we want. There are some enemies a fire will keep away, Garrett said. Bears and dire wolves and other things. No fire. So this just goes along with the relative trend here. this just goes along with the continual trend here of Garrett being right about everything and Will being wrong about everything. So you have Garrett says there are things that a fire will keep away, and we have to at this point assume he's right, that maybe other things would be kept away by fire. No, we don't have to assume that because we know that from A Storm of Swords, that the fire does keep the others away, as far as we know. I mean, unless no, the fire keeps the others away. We know that from Samwell 1, A Storm of Swords. So he's right and Raymar is wrong. Okay. Garrett's hood shadowed his face, but Will could see hard glitter in his eyes as he stared at the night. For a moment, he was afraid the older man would go for his sword. It was a short, ugly thing, its grip discolored by sweat, its edge nicked from hard use. But Will would not have given an iron bob for the lordling's life if Garrett pulled it from its scabbard. So again, this is if anything, this is a little heavy-handed, but there's another one of these class issue things being given here. I mean, Will's got this sword with jewels in his hilt that he's never actually used, even though it's new and castle forged. Versus Garrett could actually kill him, but because he's got this genuinely experienced, harder life. But his sword is we'll actually say his sword is ugly. What is the description here? His sword is short, ugly, its grip stained with sweat. Now, why did it do that? Well, I don't know why I did that. Okay, so we'll have what has happened here? Now it's back to normal. Okay, well, I don't know. I don't know about that. Okay. Its grip discolored. Its grip, I said stained. It's discolored. Its grip discolored with sweat. Its edge nicked from hard use. Because accessories are important. Finally, Garrett looked down. No fire, he muttered, low under his breath. Royce took it for acquiescence and turned away. Lead on, he said to Will. Will threaded their way through a thicket, then started up the slope to the low ridge where he'd found his vantage point under the sentinel tree. So this is a funny one. The vantage point is under a sentinel tree. I mean, this is the first connection we get to the fact that, so the sentinel is watching, is it Will watching from a vantage point under a tree, or is the tree watching because they're a sentinel? It's the tree's vantage point? I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. Underneath the thin crust of snow, the ground was damp and muddy, slick footing, with rocks and hidden roots to trip you up. Will made no sound as he climbed. Behind him, he'd heard the soft metallic slither of the lordling's rinmail, the rustle of leaves, and the muttered curses as reaching branches grabbed his longsword and tugged at his splendid sable cloak. And so this is the progression. So before, you have the trees whispering, the trees whispering, the trees whispering. Then you have this sensation of Waymar's cloak seeming half alive right behind him. And then now it's not just half alive right behind him. Now the branches are grabbing at his sword, tugging on his cloak. I mean, it's all just leading up to. It's as though the forest itself is hunting him in the identical way to the way that the others must be stalking them in some way. The great sentinel was right there at the top of the ridge, where Will had known it would be, its lowest branches a bare foot off the ground. Will slid in underneath, flat on his belly in the snow and the mud, and looked down on the empty clearing below. His heart stopped in his chest. For a moment, he dared not breathe. Moonlight shone down on the clearing, the ashes of the fire pit, the snow-covered lean-to, the great rock, the little half-frozen stream. Everything was just as it had been a few hours ago. They were gone. All the bodies were gone. Gods! He heard it behind him. A sword slashed at a branch as Sir Waymar Royce gained the ridge. He stood there beside the sentinel, longsword in hand, his cloak billowing behind him as the wind came up, outlined nobly against the stars for all to see. So again, we don't explicitly have the forest here then, but this is doing the same thing structurally as the way that his voice echoes too loudly in the wood. They're the same thing. We're now, even though we're not explicitly referencing the wood, we are noting the fact that he's outlined for all to see. I mean, he's really exposing himself here. And there's something like paradoxical or maybe ironic more so about the way that he looks noble in this. Get down, Will whispered urgently. Something's wrong. Royce did not move. He looked down at the empty clearing and laughed. Your dead men seem to have moved camp, Will. Will's voice abandoned him. He groped for words that did not come. It was not possible. His eyes swept back and forth over the abandoned campsite and stopped on the axe. A huge double-bladed battle axe, still lying where he had last seen it, untouched. A valuable weapon. On your feet, Will, Sir Waymar commanded. There's no one here. I won't have you hiding under a bush. Reluctantly, Will obeyed. And this is George R. R. Martin is so good at this, and he becomes even better and better as it goes on, and this is obviously very early in the story. But this is such... because, later on, it doesn't happen as much in the Game of Thrones that you have this internal narrative. But later on, characters really have this internal narrative, and their point of views are really tied to their thought process. My cats are going crazy. It's really tied to the thought process. So you have this I'm losing train of thought. The cat's running around. Oh, you have this. I think if this had been written in Feast or Dance, you would have had Will thinking to himself about how it's a valuable weapon. But you do have that same idea here, where we're in the paragraph following Will's thought process, and then just as Will is going to come up with the answer to this idea, just as Will is going to think of it himself, Sir Waymar interrupts, and the thought doesn't get completed. But and this is what George R. R. Martin does so well, is that you come to the idea yourself. He doesn't ever say it. The characters don't actually think it. But that doesn't mean that it's not there, and he wants you to be the one who actually thinks it ultimately. Sir Waymar looked him over with open disapproval. I am not going back to Castle Black a failure on my first ranging. We will find these men. He glanced around. Up the tree. Be quick about it. Look for a fire. So should I say Sir Waymar Royce says references House Royce? We could say that he references... I'll say he references Castle Black. I think that's fair. He glanced around. Up the tree, be quick about it. Look for a fire. Will turned away, wordless. There was no use to argue. The wind was moving. It cut right through him. Okay, I have to just come in here. The entire chapter long, we've had the cold wind. We've had the cold wind is making the trees whisper. The cold wind is the cold which burns and fills you up. And then here you have, again, I mean, I think the wind and the cold are kind of one here. We don't just have the wind moving anything else anymore. It's no longer the wind moving the trees. Just the wind was moving. It cut right through him. I mean, this is the thing that's going to happen to Waymar. I mean, if you think, if you buy the idea that the others are in some way tied to the cold wind and the cold as some kind of connected idea, if all three of these things stand in for one another, then here's the instance of the cold wind cutting, literally. I mean, this is the same exact scene. I mean, this is the thing that I love about what George R. R. Martin does, is so much of his writing is just the same scene over and over and over again. Like, in a way, you think about this whole chapter, and this whole chapter is just building up to Waymar getting cut down by the others. And so all we do is just play out that one scene of Waymar getting cut down by the others over and over and over. You have them, the trees reaching out and grabbing him, and then here's another one with the wind cutting Will. But so Will, he went to the tree, a vaulting gray-green sentinel, and began to climb. Soon his hands were sticky with sap, and he was lost among the needles. Fear filled his gut like a meal he could not digest. He whispered a prayer to the nameless gods of the wood, and slipped his dirk free of its sheath. He put it between his teeth to keep both hands free for climbing. The taste of cold iron in his mouth gave him comfort. So I don't know. No, we do have the idea that iron repels the others. I think that gets referenced in a story from Old Nan early on in this book. And I think it does come up in... it's either A Storm of Swords or A Dance with Dragons with Sam. I think... I'm not going to cross-reference this right now, but I think that iron repelling the others is an idea that maintains. And then to hear the introduction of that, he's afraid of the others, and he has this iron in his mouth, and that's going to give him comfort. Then I'll also say that Will, who I'm just noting now, we don't have any descriptions of Will because he's the POV, but we do know that he has a dirk of iron. They'll just say that, an iron dirk. And then so here's where things really start getting picked up. Down below, the lordling called out suddenly, "Who goes there?" Will heard uncertainty in the challenge. He stopped climbing. He listened. He watched. I guess that'd be more like, "Who goes there?" Uncertainty. And then here's, and this should be the confirmation about everything happening here. The woods gave answer. The rustle of leaves, the icy rush of the stream, a distant hoot of a snow owl. The others made no sound. But in a way, this is the woods giving the answer in response here. The others don't need to make a sound because the others have been one with the woods and the wind and the cold and the trees this entire way through. So even though the others are silent, they are being paralleled, and they are in some way they are the cold woods here. And so here's the answer. And the other thing here, the others made no sound. I mean, the only other, I mean, we can't, not everything is connected, obviously, but it's interesting that Ghost is silent. I mean, that Ghost must be moving through the wood silently in the exact way that the others are moving through the wood silently. I mean, so I don't know. So the others made no sound. Will saw movement from the corner of his eye, pale shapes gliding through the wood. He turned his head, glimpsed a white shadow in the darkness. Then it was gone. Branches stirred gently in the wind, scratching at one another with wooden fingers. Will opened his mouth to call down a warning, and the words seemed to freeze in his throat. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps it had only been a bird, a reflection of the snow, some trick of the moonlight. What had he seen, after all? So I think that there's something really interesting. So again, we're building up this idea of the trees being, in a way, alive. The trees being, in a way, the thing that is to be afraid of. I mean, and the trees are not like the thing, because obviously the trees are really part of a mood that is the woods and is the dark north and is the cold and the haunted forest. But because of what we later learn about like how integral the weirwoods are to everything, I do wonder if we are actually being built up the idea of the trees as kind of living things in a way. I mean, this is we're done with the trees just whispering. We're almost to the end of this thing, and now we have the leaves aren't. It's not fallen leaves whispering. It's not trees whispering. It's the branches are stirring. They're scratching each other. They have wooden fingers. I mean, that's really. And then the other thing here is, if you were to buy, so white shadow, interesting phrase. I don't know what to do with that just yet, but white shadow is interesting because you have Melisandre's shadows later on, Relora's shadows that seem to be darkness, but it's the dark shadows are cast by the light. Wait a second. No, this is it. So if you trust Melisandre, which you really shouldn't, but if you trust Melisandre, Melisandre's dark shadows, she claims that shadows are the agents of the light because it takes light to cast a shadow. Well, if that's true, what casts a white shadow, right? I mean, it's the reverse of darkness. I mean, if Melisandre was right, which, again, but it would make sense that something that is dark would cast a white shadow and that these would be the agents of darkness. And then if you buy the idea of the others having this kind of incorporeal aspect in some way, I mean, I don't know if they do or not, but if you buy the others having this incorporeal aspect, I mean, there's something to the fact that the birds are did he see anything? Was it just a reflection? Was it just a trick of the moonlight? I mean, what is really going on? But so to continue this, Will, where are you? Sir Waymar called up. Can you see anything? He was turning in a slow circle, suddenly wary, his sword in hand. He must have felt them as Will felt them. There was nothing to see. Answer me. Why is it so cold? It was cold. Shivering, Will clung more tightly to his perch. His face pressed hard against the trunk of the sentinel. He could feel the sweet, sticky sap on his cheek. I mean, so again, here you have... So this is the clue about how the fact that the others bring the cold, or maybe the cold bring the others. I mean, that's a question that gets even brought up again later on explicitly. But so here's your bit about that. But then the one of the interesting, I mean, not interesting, but so Will, faced with this supernatural cold, hugs a tree, right, for comfort, and the tree offers him this sweet, sticky sap. I mean, I think that there's, is that what Bran is kind of doing at the end of A Dance with Dragons? I mean, Bran is faced with this supernatural cold and, in response, accepts the embrace of a tree. I don't know if... obviously, that's not... I would say obviously it's not meant... That's not... Obviously, that image is not being encoded here. But it is interesting that George R. R. Martin includes this sweet, sticky sap against his cheek in this moment of fear. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, and gaunt and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armor seemed to change color as it moved. Here as white as new-fallen snow, there black as shadow, everywhere dappled for the deep gray-green of the trees. The patterns ran like moonlight on water with every step it took. I mean, insanely cool, right? Like, just an insanely cool image of a thing. Like, it's sort of a non-thing. It has flesh pale as milk, but over it, it's got this armor that is like this. I'm kind of picturing like the metal from like Terminator 2, like, you know, like this kind of like liquid, reflective, refractive. And again, you have this thing where it is the armor of the others is the wood. The armor is the new fallen snow. It is the shadows. It is the gray green of the trees. It is like moonlight on water, which is the half-frozen brook. I mean, these are all of the things that we've been referencing as elements of the wood, and here they are. They are the other's armor. I mean, obviously, okay, not literally, right? But the armor of the others is reflecting its surroundings, and I think that we can take this to mean that there is this metaphor happening here. Will heard the breath go out of Sir Waymar Royce in a long hiss. Come no further, the lordling warned. His voice cracked like a boy's. He threw the long sable cloak back over his shoulders to free his arms for battle, and took his sword in both hands. The wind had stopped. It was very cold. The other slid forward on silent feet. In its hand was a longsword like none Will had ever seen. No human metal had gone into the forging of that blade. It was alive with moonlight, translucent, a shard of crystal so thin it seemed to almost vanish when seen edge on. There was a faint blue shimmer to the thing, a ghost light that played around its edges, and somehow Will knew it was sharper than any razor. I mean, again, just an insanely cool description. I mean, if this story ever got adapted for the screen, I mean, I don't know how you would show this, because it's just crazy. I mean, to have, if this ever got an adaptation, to have this pale white figure in reflective water armor, and then the fact that the blade is like translucent but has this glowing ghost light, that's just cool. What are you gonna say? And speaking of just cool, Sir Waymar met him bravely. Dance with me then. He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Yet in that moment, Will thought he was a boy no longer, but a man of the night's watch. The other halted. Will saw its eyes, blue and deeper and bluer than any human eyes, a blue that burned like ice. Again, burning like ice. Ice burns. They fixed on the longsword trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. For a heartbeat he dared to hope. They emerged silently from the shadows, twins to the first. 3 of them, 4, 5. Sir Waymar might have felt the cold that came with them, but he never saw them, never heard them. Will had to call out. It was his duty, and its death if he did. He shivered and hugged the tree and kept his silence. Again, Will is hugging a tree in fear. I mean, I think trees, and not to be a truther about the fact of Bran being about the werewoods being connected to the others somehow here, but if we're saying that the trees are hostile to Waymar in a way, then Will should not be hugging a tree for salvation, because it's not going to give it to him. But let's see, we also have the others. All are identical. They're twins. The cold comes with them, or perhaps they bring the cold, or perhaps the cold brings them. Hard to say. And then I think this is a bit where they fixated on the longsword trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. We might think that this is because they suspect that this is Valyrian steel, because we later learn that Valyrian steel can kill others, or we actually don't know. Dragon steel can kill others. We think that dragon steel is Valyrian steel, and so we think that maybe they're afraid of swords because they think it could be Valyrian steel, or it could be dragon steel, assuming that's the same thing. And again, this gets kind of used in this theory about like they think that he's a Stark, but I don't think it's that. I think it's that they know that they could be killed by a mortal weapon if the mortal is wielding Dragonsteel. And they're trying to figure out whether or not there's actually a risk here. And the interesting implication to that is that either the others are so immortal, so long-lived, that they have an actual memory of the last time that mortals and others interacted, and that they remember that Dragonsteel is a genuine threat and that mortals have weapons that could kill them. Or the others have their own culture and their own histories and their own stories that are the inverse of all of the stories we hear about the Long Night in A Song of Ice and Fire. That if the others aren't immortal, if these are not literally the same others that were there on the first Long Night, that for them to be aware that Valyrian steel could be a threat, for them to even be wary, means that they have to know that. And if they're not immortal, that means that they have their own stories that have been passed down. There's this entire counter reverse story of their own telling of the Long Night and how they should be afraid of Dragonsteel. So that's just an interesting implication. The pale sword came shivering through the air. Again, cold and cutting is the same thing. The sword shivers, the wind cuts. Sir Waymar met it with steel. When the blades met, there was no ring of metal on metal, only a high, thin sound at the edge of hearing, like an animal screaming in pain. Insane sentence. Royce checked a second blow, then a third, then fell back a step. Another flurry of blows, then he fell back again. Behind him, to right, to left, all around him, the watchers stood patient, faceless, silent, the shifting patterns of their delicate armor making them all but invisible in the wood, yet they made no move to interfere. Okay, so in terms of what, something that took me a couple rereads to pick up on, is that there are really potent images in this story that mirror one another really explicitly. But George R.R. Martin doesn't always describe them in the same way. I mean, people love to use A Search of Ice and Fire to like find matching phrases and talk about like how words matching mean something. And I think sometimes that's true. But I think sometimes you have to think about what you're really being shown, what's really being described visually, and think about what that means. Because, I mean, breaking this down visually, they're wearing basically this like super camouflage armor. I mean, this is like, I mean, it's like, I mean, they're made all but invisible because they've got this kind of supernatural camouflage. But their faces are not covered. And their faces are milk white. But their faces are also faceless, in a way, right? Do we see that they have a face, or do we see that they don't have a face? What's the first one look like? Yeah, so it has eyes. It's gaunt. It's flesh pale as milk. We don't even have faces. They just have eyes. They just have blue eyes. I don't know if literally faceless is that. I mean, I think that maybe faceless is because he's so far away, or maybe the shadows or anything. I don't know if they literally don't have faces. But the fact that they have these white faces with blue eyes. I mean, obviously the werewoods have red eyes, but it is the same white faces. And in a way you could say that, so they blend into the wood here. So you have these like hovering white faces that blend into the wood. I mean, that's kind of what the werewoods are, is white faces that are the wood. Well, I don't know. I don't know if these are meant to be the same thing or not, but it is an interesting image. Again and again the swords met. until Will wanted to cover his ears against the strange, anguished keening of their clash. Sir Waymar was panting from the effort now, his breath steaming in the moonlight. His blade was white with frost, the others danced with pale blue light. Then Royce's parry came a beat too late. The pale sword bit through the ringmail beneath his arm. The young lord cried out in pain. Blood welled between the rings. It steamed in the cold, and the droplets seemed red as fire where they touched the snow. Sir Waymar's fingers brushed his side. His moleskin glove came away soaked with red. The other said something in a language Will did not know. His voice was like the cracking of ice on a winter lake, and the words were mocking. So obviously the fact the others speak has loads of implications to it. I've already talked about them having their own kind of stories. And then again, we have like red. The blood is fire. Fire and blood is obviously comes up later, but here you have the blood is red as fire. They give like the fire as like life and cold as like death. All of that. Sir Waymar Royce found his fury. For Robert, he shouted, and he came up snarling, lifting the frost-covered longsword with both hands and swinging it around in a flat, sidearm slash with all of his weight behind it. The other's parry was almost lazy. Okay, so I'm going to throw in Waymar Royce references. I don't want to do that. I'm going to throw in here Waymar Royce. He references. Obviously, we don't know that this is Robert Baratheon yet, but I know that it's Robert Baratheon, so we're going to do that. References Robert Baratheon. And you know what we'll do after, this is getting to the exciting part, so we'll keep reading, but after this we'll do what the others look like. Okay. When the blades touched, the steel shattered. A scream echoed through the forest night, and the longsword shivered into 100 brittle pieces, the shards scattering like a rain of needles. Royce went to his knees, shrieking, and covered his eyes. Blood welled between his fingers. The watchers moved forward together, as if some signal had been given. Swords rose and fell, all in deathly silence. It was cold butchery. The pale blade sliced the ringmail as if it were silk. Will closed his eyes. Far beneath him, he heard their voices and laughter sharp as icicles. Yeah, so again, their voices are like ice in its own way. I mean, it's really cool. Obviously, like this, I wonder if this comes from like George R. R. Martin's sci-fi history, because I mean, they really are such effective aliens in a way, right? I mean, they are really alien, and as aliens, I mean, it's really they're so unlike people. Their armor is so unlike human armor. Their voices are so unlike voices that they're not even described with the same kind of language. Their voices are like something completely different, which is cool. When he found the courage to look again, a long time had passed, and the ridge below was empty. He stayed in the tree. So again, we don't see the others leave. But I guess they do. But he stayed in the tree, scarce daring to breathe, while the moon crept slowly across the black sky. Finally, his muscles cramping and his fingers numb with cold, he climbed down. Royce's body lay face down in the snow, one arm outflung. The thick sable cloak had been slashed in a dozen places. Lying dead like that, you saw how young he was. A boy. He found what was left of the sword a few feet away, the end splintered and twisted like a tree struck by lightning. That's an interesting phrase. I don't know if that goes and becomes anything, but the cats are just going so crazy. We're going to wrap up soon. Will knelt, looked around warily, and snatched it up. The broken sword would be his proof. Garrett would know what to make of it, And if not him, then surely the old bear Mormont or Maester Aemon. Would Garrett still be waiting with the horses? He had to hurry. Will rose. Sir Waymar Royce stood over him. His fine clothes were a tatter, his face a ruin. A shard from his sword transfixed the blind white pupil of his left eye. So I'm actually going to do a... So as a white here, I mean, I think it's worth saying we had so many one-eyed figures here. I mean, it's crazy that it starts now. So you have left eye. No, I'll say this. A shard from his sword. I mean, transfixed. God, what a cool phrase to use this. His eye is transfixed, but we always think about eyes being transfixed as in they're stationary on something, but instead it's something is transfixed in his eye. I mean, that's just cool. Well, I mean, just great writing. So we also get an active description of what happens here. It's not just that their eyes don't turn blue like Spice from Dune. Like it's a burning blue behind the pupil. And I think the burning blue, I think this is an affirmation to my thing. This is what Garrett is talking about. It's not turned blue, it's burned blue. This burning blue from within, from behind the pupil, because it's lit from behind. I mean, this is like the cold filling you up. The broken sword fell from nerveless fingers. Will closed his eyes to pray. Long, elegant hands brushed his cheek, then tightened around his throat. They were gloved in the finest moleskin and sticky with blood, yet the touch was icy cold. So we have the sticky blood and the sticky sap. Will's puts his cheek against the sticky sap of the tree, and then now his throat is being surrounded by the sticky blood of the gloves. Okay, so we'll say Waymar Royce is killed by... We'll do a whole other thing here. The others. And we'll say, I don't know what their affiliation is. We'll say affiliation, the others. I mean, that's their whole thing. We don't know. We'll say whites are familiar with the others too. Chapters, A Game of Thrones prologue. The rest of these don't really apply. Let's take these things here. So we have, okay. How are these? They're white shadow. They are tall and gaunt. Tall and gaunt and hard as old bones. With flesh pale. I mean, again, not to go crazy with like the others werewood parallel here, but it being hard as bone and pale as milk. I mean, that's how the werewoods are described, is like bone and pale white. That's interesting. Okay, so you know, I want to wrap this stream up, so I'm not going to I'm not going to do the full description of their armor because I'll just copy that from a search device and fire later. Instead, let's take a look at our map here. So we've got, so right now, chapter 1, and we're just this far in. We've got Waymar, Will, and Garrod, and let's see. Well, we've got Maester Aemon got referenced. We don't know that much about Maester Aemon yet, but we do know that he's in the Night's Watch. I guess you could say that he's referenced in the Game of Thrones prologue. Yeah, I'll leave that for now. We'll go back to that. Maester Aemon gets more later, so we won't worry about this. But I'll add. See. All right, yeah. So he gets referenced, so we'll say that. We also have a couple references to Jorah Mormont, Waymar Royce. Oh my God, Waymar Royce references the old bear Mormont. Oh no, he doesn't. He doesn't say the old bear. That's Will says that in his mind, but he references Jorah Mormont. We don't know yet technically that this is Jorah Mormont. But we know, so we'll do that, and then we'll say that Will also references the old bear Jorah Mormont. And we don't know anything about Jor yet technically, but we'll say that he's referenced in the Game of Thrones prologue. We'll say that he's in the Night's Watch because we know that. The only thing we know about him technically is that he's in House Mormont. So we'll say that too. We'll say House Mormont, and we'll say that he's let's see. We'll say that he's known as the Old Bear. So we know that much at least. We got the others, so we'll say, we'll say Waymar Royce is killed by the others. But all these people see the others. So Will witnesses the others. Will is killed by Waymar Royce. We'll throw that in again. Garrod doesn't get to. We don't see Garrod do this, but I think it's believable, knowing where the story goes, that Garrod also witnessed the others. Yeah, so we'll throw these in. So we'll throw these in for, because I think I have this put in so that the class of things that these are in matters. And we'll also, I'll do the first, see, I had this set up earlier in a way that worked. So hopefully I can replicate this, but Gives reference to the Game of Thrones prologue, affiliation of the Night's Watch. The rest of this doesn't really apply. We know, technically so far, I mean, we know that the Castle Black and the Wall are associated with this. And then, if I remember how to do this right, I've got the I've got this plugin that should let me I think this is how this works. Oh, I have to look up how to do this. Wait, no, yeah, I thought this was going to do it. Where... I have data view on, so why isn't this doing this? Okay, well, I'm not gonna do this all night here. But so here's our web of things after the first chapter, and I'll also say that if we just look at people, here's everyone that we've heard about so far. Oh, that's not true. Robert Baratheon. Hold on, where's Waymar Royce references Robert Baratheon. We don't know anything about Robert Baratheon right now. I'll say he's referencing Game of Thrones prologue. We don't know anything else. We'll say that we know he's House Baratheon. And then we just put Robert into people here for him to show up. Yeah. So here's our web for now. These are, I don't know, and this is something that I have to think about, because like, do we only Garrett references Maester Aemon? Oh no, Will references Maester Aemon. Will and Garrett reference Maester Aemon. Or Maester Aemon and Garrett are connected from the ear cutting, and Will references him, but you know, do we implicitly know that Waymar knows Maester Aemon? Should I note that, or should we just accept that if it's not explicitly said, we leave it out? I have to think about that one. If you guys have opinions on that in terms of methodology, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you like this format, let me know in the comments. If you think I talked too much about the chapter, let me know in the comments. If you think it should go faster so we get to the next thing quicker, let me know. And other than that, that's a Game of Thrones prologue. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope you have fun watching it. I hope that you had fun watching it if you tuned in. And I'll see you soon for Brand 1.